an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Ghostwater Chapters 10, 11, and 12. In these chapters, Lindon levels up again. Now he is a high gold, and also he's developing his own technique, and it's really neat because, that should have occurred to me that was possible, but I just kind of thought that he was just going to have to do whatever other people did. And I'm very proud of him. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Andy for commissioning this episode. So, guys, this chapter section is when Lindon finds the spirit well. And this is one of those things where I keep on feeling like I shouldn't enjoy this as much as I do because there is something very video gamey about the level up system and getting special items that help level you up and finding springs of water that help level you up. And yet I just can't seem to find it in me to care that it's video gamey because it's just so very much fun. And this spirit well, I like that there's sort of a time limit, as it turns out, due to the fact that it's not very stable any longer and probably will begin to disintegrate around them after about a month. So, because really, you have to have something like that in place. Otherwise, there's no good reason for Lindon to not simply build a home here and camp out here for the next 6 years or whatever needs to happen. I say 6 years. Do we actually have a new time frame in mind for when the bleeding phoenix will have woken its brother? I don't know if that's something that we because we know that it's going to happen much sooner than it would have otherwise. But I don't know if we have a new specific time frame. Lindon's original time frame obviously had been about 30 years. And it's been about a year and a half at this point, I feel like. And I don't feel like we've gotten any sort of clear idea on what his time frame is now at this point. But I'm getting ahead of myself because chapter 10 starts with Yeren. And Yeren is doing that thing that she does, which is pushes herself really hard, not really thinking about the fact that she is so much more advanced than the person that she's with, that if it's kind of a challenging pace to set for herself, it's a grueling, punishing pace for the person who is with her. And part of the reason that she set this pace was that she thought it wasn't going to take that long to get where they needed to go. So she's sort of impatient, thinking we can cut a couple hours off our time or something. And then it becomes increasingly clear that they aren't getting where they want to go within a day or two. So let's see. I'm trying to find the spot where it says, the first day she pushed them so hard that Mercy had to take some elixirs from her storage to stop from collapsing. After midnight passed and they hadn't taken a break, Mercy grabbed Yeren's arm. The Akura's hair was plastered to her forehead, and she breathed like a whipped pack mule. "We're not going to get there tonight," Mercy said, a hint of begging in her tone. Yeren glanced down at the map. She chafed at the delay, but Mercy had a point. They could use some time to rest and cycle. 4 hours, Yeren allowed, and Mercy sagged to the ground, leaving her staff to topple beside her. Guys, there is nothing quite as tough as trying to keep up with somebody who is either in better shape than you or perhaps just faster, just straight up faster. And we know that Mercy has trouble. She's always like tripping, and there's a clumsiness to her that I still feel like we need an explanation for. And I mean, that's on perfectly level ground when there's nothing in her way and she's not in any particular hurry. The fact that she has managed to keep up with Aaron at all is very impressive, to be honest. Like, I'm like, elixirs notwithstanding. So then comes what I found to be one of the most amusing moments in the world. This is so adorable to me. So Mercy's like, I've never spent a night in the woods before. And Yaren's getting up in the crook of a tree. She's got her cloak out. She's about to, do a Frodo Baggins and just try and pretend that the ground is soft like a pillow and feather bed at home. And it says, Mercy fiddled with the end of her hair, looking from herself to Yaren nervously. I'm not sure there will be enough room for us both. Yaren's elbows were scraping roots on both sides. Her gold sign was folded up over her shoulders. A hair smaller and I'd have no room for my arms. You can find your own. A small door opened in the air. It was a square opening about 4 or 5 feet to a side, sitting on the ground like someone had opened a box without bothering with the actual box part. Without hesitation, Mercy rummaged around inside, pulling out fluffy padded blankets and a metal box that radiated fire aura. A heater. It won't be comfortable, Mercy said, voice downcast. The tent is really meant for one person. The tent, Yaren repeated. Mercy held up a palm-sized square of dark green forged madra, which snapped into a pyramid-shaped tent. Scripts on the outside provided an extra veil and warded away spirits. Mercy stared at the shelter like she couldn't imagine how they'd ever squeeze both people inside. But to Yaren, it looked like a palace. If the heavens grant me one wish, I'd ask to be reborn as a monarch's kid. Mercy's brow furrowed. It's just a tent. Yaren was already climbing inside. After a night in the tent, Yaren was certain the journey would be easier than she had ever imagined. They started well rested. They made good time that first morning. They had a map. More than once on her journeys with the Sword Sage, Yaren would have killed for convenience like this. So, guys, I just love this so much. Traveling with somebody when you are out of shape and they aren't is its thing. Traveling with somebody who has money is a whole other thing. And this is something that I've talked about a little bit with Rashawn, that there are a lot of hobbies out there where being, quote, good at the hobby really does come down to how much money do you have? Because there are times where the difference between being able to do a thing and not do a thing is the quality of the equipment that you can afford. And this sort of thing is a great example of, this is a real world thing. If you have money, you can afford tents that fold up to be like the size of a sugar cube. You can afford, heaters for inside the pockets of your coat. You can afford a backpack that can hold like twice as much as others and yet weighs almost nothing. You can get all of these higher quality items that make the overall experience that much easier. And it's the kind of thing that when you have the money and access to that sort of thing, you don't really think about it, because it's simply you investing in something that you enjoy doing, and you don't realize necessarily how much of a difference that shit makes until you don't have it anymore. And this is something that also is true of cooking. As somebody who cooks, I have more of a frame of reference for that. If I go to somebody's home and they have really shitty pots and pans, bad knives, making a pretty simple meal is that much more challenging because the pans don't heat evenly. They don't hold heat the same way. They aren't like, they don't have, whatever kind of the cast iron that I'm using, has its seasoning already. And so things don't stick. That sort of thing where you just take it for granted as you continue working with equipment that's high quality. Oh yeah, making this meal takes about 45 minutes. But you go to somebody else's kitchen and use their shitty Target knives, and cutting a potato takes like twice as long because this knife sucks. And all of a sudden you begin to realize, oh God, this is going to take me at least an hour and a half. And so anyway, there's a lot of people, I think, who would like to claim that if you are truly good at something, the equipment is just icing on the cake and not really the thing. And I think that is often said by people who either can't afford the good equipment and are trying to make themselves feel better, or who can afford the good equipment and they don't want to let their success rest on equipment rather than their own work. Either way, I think they're lying to themselves. So anyway, I just really love this moment, and I have to admit, I wasn't totally sure if Yaren was going to accept a night in the tent. I kind of wondered if she wasn't going to be like so salty about the fact that she's with somebody who has this sort of privilege that she was going to be like, whatever, I'll just spend the night outside. And I'm really glad that Yaren is practical enough to just be like, why would I ever spend the night out? Of course I'm getting in the fucking tent. Are you insane? Oh, I'm so glad. So they sense like a Red Moon Underlord, and they have to stay in place, veiled, for like a whole day. Then a flock of true gold level vultures caught their scent, forcing them off the path. Then there was the mammoth that grazed on trees. They had to go around him. A zone of shadow and darkness covered another hillside as Red Moon Hall skirmished with servants of the Akura family, and they had to sneak past. Before she knew it, the days flowed like water, and they still hadn't reached their destination. Their speed slowed to a crawl, and they were forced to wait for hours at a time. So Yaren did what she always did when the hours pressed in on her. She trained. So we get a look at another one of the Sword Sage's memories. And I don't want to just read from the text for the whole recording here, but I'm going to read this bit, and because I don't feel like there's a good way to summarize this. As he fell through the air, the Sword Sage continued to fight. One of his opponents flew on currents of air, his ruler technique commanding the wind aura as he soared with no wings. That one produced half-silver darts, whipping them at the Sword Sage to try and disrupt his Madra. The other rode an eagle, like a horse, carrying a long spear in one hand and a shield in the other. Her eyes blazed the same color as her sacred beasts, and sword aura gathered around the eagle's claws. Her lance strike carried the putrid, sickly energy of Death Madra. The wind artist hammered him with gusts of wind Madra to keep him off balance, to knock him into the half-silver darts. He took a look at the deadly lance an inch from his skin, the furious eagle rearing to strike behind it. He sensed the bludgeon of wind Madra from beneath him, the glimmer of sharp chaos as the half-silver darts closed from behind. With a tap of his Madra, his sword rang like a bell. So this is interesting because like the memories that Yaren has had access to previous all involved her. It was like the easiest memories for her to unlock were the ones that had some relation to her already. And now she's starting to get into memories that don't have anything to do with her. And it's just something that is really captivating her imagination, and she's thinking about them a lot, which is like, I'm really interested to see, now that we know that you can just invent like a technique, I'm interested to see if she will be able to create something of her own, imitate some of these. In this case, the Sword Sage's endless sword technique had met every attack at the same time. The eagle's claws, the deadly lance, the half-silver darts, they were all knocked aside at once as though deflected by invisible swords. Only the green column of wind Madra was unaffected, and the sage sliced that in half with a wave of Madra from one of his 6 sword arms on his back. 6. I am trying to picture that, and I don't feel like it's materializing. That's too many. That's just too many. I'm just saying. So she's real. It says the endless sword was the ruler technique for which her whole path was named. It was the root and branch of her master's fighting style. But she hadn't even used it in her fight against Bai Ro, which I didn't even really think about it. It says the truth was hers was a pale shadow of her master's. Her master could use the endless sword to cut 1 page from a closed book. She just hit the aura around her weapon as hard as she could with her Madra. It spread out like ripples in a pond, cutting everything in its path. And when it passed through another source of sword aura, that aura burst too. Her master had called it aura resonance with enough Madra behind it, and it could start cascading reactions that could tear a city to pieces. But in her case, it didn't pack enough punch. She could only use it effectively against enemies weaker than she was, and what good was a weapon that couldn't be used against real opponents? So I found this really fun because, so much of what we see of Yeren is from other people's eyes, either Lindon's or someone else's, and they all are always so steadily and consistently impressed with her and see her as such a prodigy that and we don't really get a lot to point out how maybe she's not, or maybe she is, but there's room for her to grow. We don't know what's possible. And I really liked getting to see her remembering things that the Sword Sage was able to do and comparing herself to what he was doing and being frustrated by it, knowing there's more to be done here. There's more precision, there's more power, and I am not reaching it because I just keep on sort of the only thing that reminds me that Yeren can continue to grow is the fact that she's only a high gold, and there's obviously many levels above that. But otherwise, I haven't really had a good, clear idea on the ways in which her combat styles can be improved, because she's just such a badass fighter that the technique thing is harder for me. I don't have the scope of imagination. And I will say that I have sort of a love-hate relationship with that aspect of these books, in that I am a big fan of the way the author is playing a lot of things very close to the chest and not showing us too much about what's possible until it's time to meet a character for whom that is already possible. There's not a lot of info dumping. It's just, I'm going to show you by introducing you to a person who can already do this. But there is a bit of feeling of sometimes for me, a lack of grounding when I feel like the sky is really the limit and I just don't know what's possible, because so much is apparently possible that I hadn't thought from the first book. And now I'm realizing there's no ceiling on this. So as far as I know, and that brings to mind Suriel as well. And the fact that we haven't seen Suriel this book at all, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure if she will show up or if she won't, what's going on with her. But, the fact that we have people who are sort of God level, it makes it feel like there's so much open that it's a little bit overwhelming and boggling. And I think that's the point. But it's hard for me sometimes to hold that in my head, if that makes sense. So it says if she didn't find a new weapon, she'd be forced to rely on the blood shadow, every time the battle became tough. It had tormented her for too long. She couldn't lean on it. Frankly, it turned her stomach when she so much as thought about it for too long. If she never had to use it, that would be the real victory, which meant she needed to win without it. This is one of those, I'm not totally sure. I don't know enough to know if she's right or not. Part of me is I think I kind of get why she'd feel that way. But another part of me is what's the point of overcoming this thing and managing to make it a part of your arsenal if you're not going to use it? That seems very like, it's sort of just doing this, the tie it around your waist and pretend it isn't there thing that she had been doing. I don't see that helping her. I was hoping that her overpowering it would sort of bring her to terms with what it is. And it doesn't seem like that's happened for her. And I'm just kind of like, girl, when are you going to just accept that this is part of your life now? You know? So there were 3 higher levels of mastery. He'd barely mentioned any of this to her before his death. She discovered most of it from the visions he'd left behind in his remnant. Her Madra was already dense enough to cross the barrier to true gold. A deeper connection to her master's remnant could give her that last nudge she needed to get there. From the branches above her, a brown leaf drifted slowly to the ground. With a deep breath, she delicately tapped the sword in her lap with her Madra. The dense silver aura around it flared, pushing out into one direction. She could control that much, at least. Directing it one way or the other was an advancement for her. Now her goal was to cut that falling leaf in 2. The leaf exploded into shreds. It fell to the ground as a fistful of dust. And she's just like, God damn it. She takes like an hour of trying this and isn't able to do it. So then we go to Akura Mercy, who's hanging upside down, and she is trying to shoot an arrow with her eyes closed, upside down. After she had held that position for several minutes, 3 leaves fell from her tree at once. Purple eyes snapped open and she slipped her legs out of the branch. She fell, arms blurring, as she released the first arrow, pulling a second from the air, stringing it and loosing it, then a third. Only then did the first arrow pierce the first leaf, pinning it to the ground several yards away. The second followed suit. The third arrow brushed by its target, sending the leaf spinning in the wind of its wake. Mercy's head cracked as it hit the ground, and she crumpled. And she's just like, God damn it. First of all, I was supposed to get that other leaf. Second of all, I was supposed to land right side up on my feet. And I love this. Yaren's like, do you expect to fight upside down often? And she's like, no, but this is how you practice. Do you not practice this way? And I love the idea that to Yaren, doing it this way is like unnecessarily complicated. Whereas to Mercy, she's just like, well, this is just how you do it. Why would you not make it as difficult as you possibly could? And there's a part of me that wonders if Yaren's going to start to kind of do this herself, because Yaren loves challenges. And I could see her beginning to grow interested in doing things this way. So Mercy tells her finally at this point, that's right, I have news. I was at the top of the tree checking on the barrier, and I realized what we thought was a hill was just that mammoth sleeping, and the mountain is farther away than I thought. And Yaren's like, motherfucker. And Mercy says, so we're not here, we're here. And she points to a spot really, really close to the portal. If the wall wasn't there, we could see it from the tree. It's fading away. You can see through it now, and you couldn't this morning. So it says, if Mercy was right, it was covering the beach and the end of the island more than another expansive forest. When the boundary came down, they would only be a few hours' run from the portal. And she's about to head out. And Mercy's like, dude, we need to eat. And she says, it won't come down any faster just because we're closer. She started to say so, but a deafening bestial scream covered the island out of nowhere. It was joined by more and more until it sounded like a choir of raging spirits howling at the heavens. A furious, burning presence lit up her spiritual senses like a flying bonfire. And she thinks that maybe it's those vultures again. And Mercy's like, nah, son, that's dragons. And she can feel them passing their senses over everything, searching for something. I love this so much because poor Yaren. It says, I wonder what's rustled their scales. Mercy shivered. I think we should get in the tent. And Yaren's like, yeah, you know what? That doesn't seem like a bad idea. After all, it wasn't like the dragons were looking for them. The heavens couldn't hate her that much. Which is really interesting because this intimates to me the dragons might not know exactly who they're looking for at all. Lindon, it's hard to know exactly the timing of this, but Lindon is not, like, he spends some time getting to the next bubble. And I really would have thought that they started looking for him right away. So the fact that they don't zero in on him, I had just sort of expected that, like, based on what, I'm trying to remember what the name of the other, or Sage of the Silver Heart, that was her. It seemed like she kind of saw everything that had happened regarding the showdown initially, as if she were watching like a closed circuit TV of the situation. And so I kind of assumed that, I can't remember her name. I just remember that it was like 11 syllables long and ended in off. But Carrie's sister, I had thought she would be able to like just kind of look down and see who killed her sister. That she would be able to just zero in on that. Safaranatoth, says Andy. Thank you, Andy. Safara. I'm going to call her Sophie. Sophie, I really had expected her to be able to see who killed her sister very specifically and track Lindon down. Now, I think my mistake here is Lindon doesn't stay out there for too long. After he beats her sister and grabs her jewelry, he goes back into the shelter, which she can't see into, I'm assuming. I don't know that, but I'm assuming. And then he hangs out in there for like a couple days before they go. It's like 3 days, I think. So I guess even if she does know exactly who she's looking for, that could explain why he's able to sort of like slip by unnoticed, at least initially. I have no doubt that's a temporary situation and she is going to figure out exactly who and where he is. But I was surprised at the fact that there was like a search happening rather than a really purposeful strike. So speaking of, we cut back to Lindon here. I love this so much. Dross is saying, you're just having a little break? Having some time to yourself? That's okay. Nothing wrong with that. You've just been through a fight, haven't you? But now you're rested. You're refreshed. You're ready to get yourself up and move on. The road doesn't get any shorter while you wait, as they say. It had been 5 minutes. Dross, buddy, calm yourself down. And Dross is basically just like, dude, I told you about a spirit well. You'll be totally fine once we get to the spirit well. I don't know why you're dragging your feet here, because that'll just fix the problem that you're having at this moment. So let's just go. And obviously, Lindon is like drained. Like he came very close to death right there. He needs some time. But Dross doesn't understand that. So he has one of her pieces of jewelry. And he activates this like key that's very small, hanging off of one of the necklaces. And all of a sudden, a doorway opens, and it led to a closet hanging there in midair. So I'm assuming that this is the same thing that Akura Mercy had, which is really something that, like, she's been disowned by her family, and yet she's still got, like, awesome toys and trinkets like this, which we find out are super duper fucking rare. It turns out that a sage is the weakest person who can create one of these. The closet was only a few feet deep and mostly empty. A few chairs were stacked in the center with pillows and blankets stuffed beneath them. 3 sealed clay jugs sat in the corner, and based on a quick glimpse of their contents, they seemed to contain water. A few scripted bundles were revealed to hold dried meat. Rations, water, furniture, and bedding. Practical things to hold in a magical storage space, except perhaps for the chairs, which is interesting. This is one of those things that always brings to mind to me what I would hold if I were going to have a little space like this where I could carry anything with me. And the possibilities are just vast. And Orthos is impressed by this, which you don't see an impressed Orthos very often. He says it's rare for even an underlord to have such a thing. It contains a private space accessible only by the one who holds it. Whatever you keep in here, no one can touch it unless they steal the key. There were a few eye-catching treasures shoved into corners. A sculpture of a woman in smooth white jade, a mirror of pure gold, a jeweled star, and a teacup that seemed to be made from a paper-thin eggshell. None of them gave off the slightest aura of power, but Orthos suggested they were valuable enough that they could fund Lindon's entire advancement to the end of True Gold, assuming they could escape this pocket world and find a buyer. And he says the necklace would cost half as much as, or would cost as much as half the Aurelius family. Wow. I mean, goddamn. So the preparation takes 2 days, not 3. My bad. The first thing Lindon did was smash the chairs and toss them back into the closet. He didn't need furniture, but as a fire artist, he could always use kindling. He placed the chest with all of his belongings next to the bundle of kindling, then emptied all the water jars and filled them with water from the Well of Dreams. The well was only a few inches deep now, but that was still far more water than Lindon wanted to leave behind. He filled all 24 vials they'd found in the storage room, placed them in their racks, and stored them in the Void Key as well. Can I tell you guys how delighted I am that he can take that much with him? I love it so much. Water jars are filled. Then we've got the vials that are filled. Now, the remaining question is, what kind of containers is he going to find in order to carry with him some of the spirit water? Because that's a real toss-up. What do you want more? The spirit water or the Well of Dreams water? I'm going to say he probably wants spirit water more. Probably, right? But I wouldn't feel confident enough in that, making the sacrifice without thinking long and hard about it. Even after 2 days of preparation, he was reluctant to leave. There was still water in the dream well, plenty of food from the carp. He and Orthos could cycle easily in the smoldering wasteland they'd made, and the return to regular cycling was helping heal Orthos' spirit. So finally, he decides that it's time to go because Little Blue is really not doing well. She is still super pale, and she's passed out half the day now. And he's just yeah, we really do have to get out of there. So they head out, and Dross, there's a moment, first of all, in which, he tries to leave Lindon in the Void Key closet. He says, "I'll come back for you." It's the Void Key closet, right? But I'm trying to find the spot. Opening it one last time, he walked into the closet and pulled Little Blue from his shoulder. Yeah. And when he says, "I'll come back for you," I didn't really understand why he phrased it that way, because the thing is around his neck. It's not like he's leaving her anywhere. And when she protests, he says, "You want to come with us?" And I'm like, but she will be coming with you. She'll just be in a container. And I don't know. It was just a kind of an odd moment where I was like, am I misunderstanding how this whole thing works? Like, you can open that wherever you go, right? Am I right about that? So I don't understand really the main thing is that she doesn't want to stay in there. And Lindon kind of understands that because he's growing low-key claustrophobic after all of the times that he's been locked up. But I don't understand what his intention was. I guess it was just to keep her out of direct danger. But I don't understand why he phrases it the way he does, because he makes it sound like he's leaving her in this building and then eventually going to come back for her. Andy says, I think he's saying I'll come back because to Little Blue it seems like she's being abandoned. I guess, I mean, just like, I feel like saying I'll come back makes it seem more like she's being abandoned versus being like, don't worry, buddy, you're going to be around my neck. You're going to be with us the whole time. It's going to be fine, you know? But whatever, it doesn't matter because she winds up staying out there with him in the open. And they head out, and it turns out that there's like this thing called a diamond scale sea drake, which Dross didn't tell them about. It's a giant fucking fish monster, way bigger than the carp. Apparently the carp were bred to feed those things. And Lindon says, is there any way to avoid them? Some believe that hope is the strongest force in the universe, Dross said. Although that is objectively untrue. Oh, man. So they go out there, and he swims after them. Let's see. He swam after them, reaching a hand into his pocket to make sure that Little Blue was secure. Satisfied that she was, he pulled out Suriel's marble, adding a faint blue candle glow to their procession. To his surprise, Orthos was a capable swimmer, to which I'm like, to your surprise, he's a turtle. Of course he's a good swimmer. What are you talking about, you lunatic? You should have strapped yourself to his back and just let him pull you along. So they had swum only a few yards before they reached the edge of a cliff and looked down. Warm, inviting light spilled up from below, a new habitat. The bubble was shaped a little differently than the previous, like a wide circle rather than a dome, but the top was only a dozen feet straight down. The relief was like a breath of air. He could swim that distance, no problem. He was honestly surprised they hadn't seen the light from this place before when it was so close. So he looks back and he sees a pair of eyes coming at him, and all of a sudden he's like, oh, fuck. And this diamond scale comes at him. And he turns and bolts. And Orthos bites into it. The serpent's ferocious twist threw Lindon free, and for a moment he was lost in an aimless blur of bubbles and darkness. He clawed in the direction he hoped was the ocean floor. So Dross is on the ground in his gem, and he has to go and grab him. And I was like, oh, that was too close for comfort. You need to figure out a way to tie Dross around your neck or something. Dross should go into his void key, honestly. Like, Dross is way too valuable. Don't leave him out. What are you doing? So eventually the diamond scale comes at him and comes at Orthos. Orthos is still wrestling with it. And finally, let's see, if he could reach the bubble, he could use his Madra properly, and then maybe he could help Orthos. They fell into the center of the ring, kicking up another cloud of sand, and Lindon pulled himself to the edge of the habitat. He clawed through the bubble, pushing his head through, getting a deep gasp of breath that brought life back to his Madra. So he begins to fall through the air, and when he gets in there, that tired dude is standing there that we've seen before, who is named Ziel. Now, I knew his name was Ziel. We'd met him earlier, but his introduction here was still so funny to me that I burst out laughing when I was listening to this. So, the fish monster manages to, like, also get into the habitat and just swim around in the air. the way that the carps did. And Lindon, for some reason, despite the fact that earlier he was like, does the bubble keep them out? And Dross was like, oh no, they just like it better out there, but they can come in here. For some reason, even though he'd been told that, he didn't think that they could do the same thing that the carps could do. So this comes as a shock to him. He's like really irritated that something this huge has the same abilities as like the smaller fish. And so he kind of thought coming into this thing, he was going to have like this big advantage, and he doesn't have the advantage he thought he was going to have. And yet this dude steps forward. A blink later, the drake slammed to a halt like a fist hitting a steel plate. There was a sickening crunch that echoed through the library, and a brief flash of green light, and the huge serpent's head exploded under a titanic hammer blow. This dude fucks this fish's whole shit up. And then he just walks away, and Orthos is like, my God, that shit was ridiculous. What's your name? And he says Ziel and keeps walking. But the way it's delivered in the audiobook, the narrator says Ziel in this like kind of breathless, tired voice. And when you don't see the spelling right in front of you, like when you're reading, you hear the word Ziel, like Zeal, like zest for life. And because this guy is the exact opposite of a person who has zest for life, it is so hilarious that that's his name that I just fell out laughing. I like paused it and like explained what was going on to Owen because he was wondering why I was laughing so hard. I swear to God, this narrator's pretty good, guys. And we find out later that Ziel has got his shit all fucked up, and we don't know what happened to him. But it's clear Ziel was like a really big deal at one point or another. Dross calls him Ziel of the Wasteland. There are plenty of rumors. I can tell you he's under the Beast King's protection. And you know what that means. And Lindon's like, no, I don't. Dross says, the Beast King. He's been a legend for centuries. A crippled boy who befriended some ancient sacred beasts and eventually rose to the level of a herald. He's one of the guardians who stands in the wasteland between Akura territory and the land of the dragons, protecting human civilization. Or so they say. Without him and others like him, the Black Flame Empire would be a war-torn desert. The Beast King spends all his time in a wasteland of endless battle. He cares about nothing but his war. If he's taken on a human, then that means he thinks this kid will be a critical weapon against the dragons. Not too surprising, seeing how he dealt with that diamond scale. Maybe that was a secret anti-dragon technique. And Lindon's kind of like, that's interesting, because he didn't really seem like that was his, like, obsession or anything. I don't get how this... Well, I guess we'll just have to see. And at this point, Dross is like, well, obviously he went to the spirit well. So just follow the bloody footsteps on the ground. So they head in, and Lindon asks this dude's permission to drink, and Ziel's just like, I don't care. There's plenty. Who cares? He just, Ziel's tired, and he just really doesn't seem like he gives a shit. And honestly, I just enjoy the hell out of this so much, with so many people who are just very intense, take themselves really seriously. This dude is just such an oddity, you know? So they go in and they find Sylvan Dream Seeds. And Dross explains that they're like river seeds, but they're born under the influence of dream aura instead of water aura. And this is something that I feel like may be important later, but at the moment, nothing really comes of this. They're just very basic dream seeds. They don't really have much form or power at the moment. So Lindon takes a sip from the spirit well, and immediately is like, what? Oh my God. And the effect is just immediate. He can cycle more easily. When he does cycle, it's just like more productive. Everything about it is insane. His charred Madra channels are immediately like getting healed up. It's like Little Blue touched him combined with a Madra pill. And it says he came up for air gasping. Jars. We need jars. Goddamn right you do. So then we go to chapter 12. The spirit well was Lindon's greatest dream made real. It was like a heavenly feast set before him, an endless spring of power from which he could literally drink. Cycling had never been so rewarding or so effortless. He and Orthos moved into another room that was filled with garbage, and they set it on fire, leaving Dross to open the vents and get rid of the smoke. It became their cycling room for Black Flame. After a mouthful of spirit well water, each revolution of Madra produced twice the result for half the effort. Lindon missed his parasite ring. The scripted half-silver ring would have filtered his Madra even further. Remind me, Andrew, where is his ring? What happened to it? Was it in his pack that got blasted by what's-her-face? I'm just going to assume that's... Yes, it was in his pack. Okay. Yeah, that sucks that he lost that. That blows. Oh, well. And after the first few hours, he was pushing the barriers of Logold. If Lindon ever met Northstrider face to face, he was going to prostrate himself at the monarch's feet in gratitude for building this place. So, meanwhile, Ziel is out here, like, taking a sip, kind of like, I guess. And then he just dumps it over his head because he just is trying to get the blood off himself. And Lindon's like, dude, what are you doing? Why don't you drink it? And Ziel says, take a look and tell me if you think it'll do any good. So Lindon looks at his spirit. It says his core, a hazy green light, had been destroyed. Something had deliberately sliced it into pieces, then stitched the pieces back together. Half his Madra channels were dark, and the other half were twisted and knotted into chaotic patterns. Lindon closed off his perception, horrified. A true gold with that much damage to their spirit should either be dead or unsold, but he had the power of a true gold now. How powerful had he been before? And I'm like, yo, good question. What is that about? So he kind of backs off, just like doesn't say anything, and leaves the dude to his own devices for the most part without asking what happened. It's sort of the kind of thing I think that Lindon thinks it would just be really rude to ask him what happened. Personally, I don't think Ziel would care. Ziel seems to be, like, it seems like the destruction of his spirit has made it so that he doesn't seem to have, like, the attachment to things in, like, a personal, emotional way that he even had before. I think the fact that he invited Lindon to look in the first place means that he would be perfectly willing to talk about it if Lindon asked. But he's not really that, like, interested enough to share his story without prompting either. So Lindon goes back to his own shit. And Little Blue, meanwhile, she looks at the spirit well, and she's not real sure about it. And then she, like, dips a hand in it, goes, oh, shit, and then just jumps in. And it says she swam around like a fish, swimming happily and growing deeper in color with every passing minute. A night in there, and she would be back to normal, which is pretty awesome. I love the fact that this works for her as well. So Dross asks to be dropped into the pool. And Lindon's like, yeah, all right, sure. And drops him in there. Doesn't really think about him all day. And then eventually he hears Dross come up out of the water. And he's like, yeah, you know, that's fine. It was cool and all. But I feel like really bored by it. And I'm just kind of worried about how long it would take for me to get the benefits of it. because it took 50 years of being in the other one for anything to really happen. And I don't want to do that again. And Lindon says, well, it's too bad that you can't just drink it. And Dross is like, oh, shit, yeah, I can. I'm just going to borrow your body real quick. And Lindon's like, wait, hold up. You're going to what? Is that allowed? Can he do that? Is that okay? And Orthos is like, there are people out there who take on sacred artists, who take on natural spirits as part of their path. People do that shit all the time. It's perfectly safe. And I love, too, that, like, before Dross has even really, like, got it across to Lindon that this is okay to do, he's bouncing off Lindon's chest. He's trying to get in there, and Lindon's not quite letting him in. I just find it so funny. Dross is so overeager. Motherfucker, you need to calm down for a second. Boundaries. Okay, dude? But eventually, Lindon's like, okay, and just lets him in. And then he drinks some of the water, and he cycles it to Dross, and Dross is like, oh my God, it's working. This is awesome. He says, it's roomy in here. Were you born with 2 extra large cores? I'm sorry, that sounds rude, but do feel free to answer. And that's really interesting because, like, we've heard about how Lindon feels like he's got more Madra at his disposal than he used to, but I didn't really connect the fact that I didn't think about the fact that the size of his cores was larger than average. I thought that this was just big in comparison to what he had before, and that he was, like, finally reaching the same level as everyone else. Dross's reaction seems to me to indicate this is unusual. And that made me think about Athan and the fact that he was able to, like, refill the Madra on the cloud when they were traveling back to Serpent's Grave in the first place. He, like, fills the tank up with very little effort in a speed that even makes Fisher Gesha, like, look at Lindon like, holy fucking shit. So I guess that the heaven and earth cycling technique makes your core bigger. Like, I can only imagine if that was something, if Athan was able to do something that Gesha was like, that shit would literally have taken me a couple of weeks. This must like, how big are Athan's cores? You know, like, Athan's hiding a lot, clearly. This motherfucker is playing everything very, very close to the chest. I respect that, but I'm so curious. Like, I just want to know. Just tell me, Athan. So, he's trying, as Dross is inside, to not use the heaven and earth wheel to advance. Because he doesn't want Dross to see the technique. So let's see. He suppressed the purification wheel as much as he could with Dross inside. It was inconvenient, but Athan's warning still made him hesitant to let the technique's existence leak. My memories have so many connections I didn't see before. This must be what having a brain feels like. Only, you know, less mushy. And eventually, Lindon asks him, is that enough? Do you need more? And Dross says, I'll chew on this for the rest of the day. At that rate, maybe 2 more weeks or 3. And Lindon's like, 3 weeks? Because that for him sounds fantastic. He would love to hang out here that long. But he's not sure if this place will come down before then. And Ziel's like, we have at least a month before this place decays enough for it to be dangerous. Probably even longer. And Lindon's like, oh, that's awesome. Yes, please. So Lindon is a little bit resentful of the fact that Dross is going to rely on him to advance. Like, basically, Lindon feels like, I'm super curious about what's going to happen when we do this. It's not that I don't want to help Dross out, but every bit of me helping him is taking away from the time that I'm going to get for myself to advance. Which I understand. I'm not mad at him for being a little bit, like, bitter about that. I get it. However, he reaches high gold on Black Flame in 2 days. And so maybe he's going to reach true gold by the end of his stay here, because it seems like that shit is happening very quickly. Let's see. And Lindon, when he reaches this level, he's so excited about being on the same level as Yeren, because they're on equal footing for the first time ever. And again, I totally get his excitement. I do. But she's almost to true gold, as we saw when we were in her head. So this might be a short-lived thing, unless he really levels up before getting out of here again. And I love to, there's a moment where Orthos says, "It is the role of a high gold to think more deeply on the purpose and nature of your path. At this stage, sacred artists that have bonded remnants often begin to inherit insights from their predecessors." Ziel interrupts and says there's no need for insight before Underlord. So this kind of gives some credence to my theory that there was sort of like a mental shift that needed to happen to grow to Underlord. High gold only indicates a certain density of Madra. You could go from low gold to the peak of true gold with 2 pills. And Orthos says, shortcuts are for the weak. And I'm like, dude, what do you call the spirit well? Really? You don't think that's a shortcut? Come on, Orthos. Come on. Shortcuts are for the weak. Got news for you, man. Lindon was one of the weak. And that's what he did. He used some pills. He got some help. It's fine. Shut up. Ziel raised 2 fingers as though holding something very small. I used to have those pills. They were this big. They smelled like fresh berries and summer leaves. He cast his glance down at the floor and dragged himself down the hallway. Really brings down the mood, doesn't he? Dross observed. Oh my god, I fucking cackled, guys. I really did. So, meanwhile, food situation. You know how he had been eating the carp and it like almost knocked him out the first time, and now he's like really managing to grow stronger using it. Well, it turns out that the sea drake is way stronger. And I love this. 1 bite of the cooked meat had knocked Lindon out for 6 hours. It nourished his body even more than the silverfang carp had, but it was at the brink of what his body could tolerate. After eating it, his iron body had consumed so much Madra that it delayed his training even with the spirit well's help. After reaching high gold, he could keep himself conscious while cycling 1 bite, but it took everything he had. He couldn't afford to have more than 1 bite a day, so the rest of his meals came from carp steaks. I love the fact that the thing that almost knocked him out the first time, now it's like his main food source. And then there's this other thing that's like even more intense. I love it. I really do. I love it. So Lindon starts wandering around, because this is like a library with these dream tablets, basically like books, but it's like they're little video thumbnails, you know? And there are some that are way too advanced for him to even comprehend. He tried an Overlord one. He got knocked out and didn't even remember what he had seen. So one of them he taps into, and he sees a woman who is creating this spear of red ice, and she is going to try and kill this huge spider that is like, it says crouching over her city, spreading its webs from building to building. She only hoped there was anyone down there to survive this. It says, Mayantaya, Underlord on the path of Glacier's birth, the devastation of Whisperbark. And reminder that Dross is like inside him as he does this, and experiences the whole thing as Lindon does. And Dross is like, that was really depressing. And he says, go back to the one with the man who had just cured his daughter's disease. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of awesome, actually, to be able to like go into a really good experience like that. I love that that's something that can be recorded too. So this is when he begins to think about the path of twin stars and the enforcer technique that he wants to create for it using pure Madra, which is way harder to manipulate because there's just so much less information about doing it. Like everything, it's just pure Madra being a weapon is just not common. So there's not a lot out there about it. And eventually, I'm running out of time here. I'm out of time, really. Ziel sees what he's doing, and Ziel gives him another sort of talking to about how he needs to slow down and like live his life a little bit. It's a similar thing as to what Fisher Gesha said. He tells him the prize is an illusion. The mountain has no peak. You keep climbing and climbing until you fall off and break yourself at the bottom. High gold is one step, true gold is another step, but there's no end to it. You could walk forever, but every path ends in a fall. And Lindon's like, that's all well and good, but I have an actual thing that I'm trying to fight. I'm not attempting to advance for the sake of it because I just want power. And that seems to mean something to Ziel. So he gets up and has Lindon follow him and shows him, it says, the Script Lord, Archlord on the path of whispering wind, the creation of the seven principles. And Lindon's like, this is an Archlord thing. I tried an Underlord and it knocked me flat. I don't think I could do this. And Lindon's like, he pushes him. He's like, just go ahead, try it. And Lindon's like, okay. So he drinks some of that water. He gets in there and he sees this memory. No one with any knowledge had ever reevaluated the principles of pure Madra. Why would they? No one advanced without harvesting aura. As a result, the children used inefficient techniques. Now his principles would revolutionize how the sacred arts were taught to the least disciples. And this, I don't feel like we get the whole impression here of how this works, but clearly Lindon gets something from this. He wished he had a book on the seven principles. The Archlord in the vision hadn't spelled out his thought processes for a stranger. But he understood enough. Even a brief glimpse into an Archlord's revision of pure Madra cycling techniques gave him a better sense for the mechanics involved. The vague, intuitive feeling was invaluable. He tried running the technique again, this time modifying his cycling pattern based on the Archlord's thoughts. He had been trying to cycle pure Madra like water, but it wasn't water Madra. It simply felt more like it than black flame. Pure Madra was lighter, more delicate, more adaptable, but it still strengthened the body naturally. It was the foundation on which all other aspects of Madra were layered. This time, he gathered up the momentum in minutes. Rather than a furious whitewater froth, his Madra now flowed smooth and steady. He began executing the new pattern, making alterations wherever it felt wrong. He would have to write these insights down later, but for now, he had to seize this moment of inspiration. When he opened his eyes, white and blue haze hung in the air around him, billowing like steam. Strength pooled in his body, steady and calm. And basically, what this does is make himself like the control over his body and his movement is absolute. To a point that the precision this is sort of what Yaren's going for. It's just beyond anything he's ever been able to do and very, very different from everything he's done with Black Flame, which is the opposite of precise. It's just these massive destructive blasts. This is very, very different. And Ziel asks what he'll call the technique, and he says the Soul Cloak. And Ziel says that name is so plain that poets who used to name techniques in his honor would never have allowed that. And each character was a poem in itself. My bed was stuffed with phoenix feathers. This dude, man, you need to stop walking down memory lane. You're just depressing yourself. And Lindon says, I am overwhelmed with my own weakness. Advanced sacred artists must have 1,000 techniques. Ziel says, no, they develop 1,000 ways to use the same 7 or 8. He's like, you could make a new technique if you are a monarch, like every few seconds. But just because it's new doesn't mean that it's better. The point is, when you continue to practice a technique for a long time, you become so good at it that it's way more powerful than anything new. And he says, for this reason, old true golds are stronger than young, but they aren't respected as much because true golds have a better chance of advancing farther if they're young. And Lindon thanks him again, and Ziel says, time grows short. Advance your second core. And I totally forgot about that, having to do this whole thing again. So damn. But I'm really, really excited. Like, I can't wait to see what else he's able to do with this pure modular thing now that he has this insight. I really appreciate Ziel showing him. Like, Ziel is just behaving so differently than everybody else who has been involved in this little competition. He just seems to be not invested in the idea of the, like, competition it's for the sake of it, which I appreciate. It just seems like he's like, yeah, you're here, I'm here, I'll help you, I don't care, whatever, it's fine. And you know what? Linda needs all the help you can get, so thanks, Ziel, for that. Appreciate you. All right, I'm way over time, so I really have to stop. But thank you again, Andy, for commissioning this episode. I hope you guys are enjoying it all, and I will be seeing you again next week with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.